Namaste. Welcome to everyone to another episode of Navimash podcast. Today there is some StreamYard issue. It shows bad connectivity. So I'm not getting the camera right now active. So we'll just wait for a few minutes. If the connectivity improves, the Wi-Fi signal is not doing good. So, but still, we will start our session and we will start our session as usual with our presentation. And let's give few moments for people to join in. Let's give people 2-3 minutes, people to join. We have to reschedule this as well because of connectivity, and a lot of people don't actually wake up at 10 a.m. So this is an important session, and I wanted people to actually watch this. This is important that people actually get to know how things work. Cool. Let's give a minute more for people to join, and then let me then get the presentation ready for people. Today we have a lot of things to discuss. Okay, let's go ahead with the presentation. So we have heard a lot about disinformation with social media and with fast communication technologies, social media, and other forms of communication being easily available at a very cheap cost to a lot of people. Disinformation was always there, but with the advent of social media specifically, where you can reach to almost every human being, and if you have something to share, something if you can reach up to a billion or two people in a very short amount of time. So information and disinformation, both of them are important for various reasons, and we'll today we are going to just understand a little bit more about it. And disinformation is also linked to the narrative wars which takes place. So they all are interrelated and interlinked. So today we are going to explore disinformation. We all know what information is, but let's explore the concept of disinformation. Definition and importance of disinformation. Disinformation refers to the deliberate spread of false information, often crafted to mislead and manipulate public opinion in contemporary geopolitics. It plays a crucial role in state-sponsored campaigns, shaping narratives and influencing electoral processes across the nation. If people remember, there was a lot of misinformation campaign in 2022 Indian election, where deep fake and AI was used to actually morph some union minister's voice to actually manipulate the message he was given and manipulate his voice and cut clips to give a different kind of impression. And it did work in so many ways. And the ruling dispensation was about to lose power. They hang on to power, but they could have lost the war. They could have lost the elections completely. The role of artificial intelligence in disinformation. Artificial intelligence has revolutionized the creation and dissemination of disinformation. Advanced algorithms enable the generation of hyper-realistic deepfakes, enhancing the credibility of false information and complicating detection efforts by individuals and authorities. So the deepfake used in the election campaign in 2024 by various groups and people is one example of this. The landscape of social media and information flow. Social media platforms serve as primary channels for the rapid spread of disinformation, characterized by low barriers to entry. Remember, this is a very important point. Social media is very effective. Why it is very effective? Because people, there is a very low barrier to acquiring or watching or consuming social media. If you remember, there was a news story that Facebook wanted their app to be embedded, and they struck a deal with the telecom providers that data would be free. They will not be charged any data prices. Okay, in case they use a specific social media platform. Now, with that social media platform will have billions of users. They just need to pay some money to the telecom providers, and they would have a monopoly on the eyeballs. So, this low barrier of entry is very important point, which is noted here. Characterized by low barriers to entry for content creation, the algorithms of these platforms often amplify sensationalist narratives, leading to the viral spread of misleading information among vast audiences. Impact on political polarization and public trust. The prevalence of disinformation fosters increasing political polarization and declining trust in mainstream media. As audiences encounter more fragmented narratives, the susceptibility to fake news intensifies, ultimately threatening the integrity of democratic institutions and public discourse. Now we're going to discuss China's disinformation strategy. If you remember our previous stream, the second stream that we did, where China uses the Chinese intelligence, not China, but Chinese intelligence agencies, by default the state, actually uses narratives and long-term narrative building and long-term public opinion in their favor. In that strategy, disinformation is also a part. So let's discover and explore how China uses disinformation strategy. The three warfare doctrine, first outlined in 2003, China's three warfare doctrine integrates psychological operations, media manipulation, and legal warfare to shape perceptions and influence policy abroad. This comprehensive strategy targets adversary weaknesses while reinforcing China's geopolitical agendas. Last line is very important. This comprehensive strategy targets adversary weaknesses. In a lot of situations, in a lot of circumstances, a democratic state with its rights given to the people, to the organizations, and to the society can be utilized by nefarious and adversary agencies, organizations, countries to use its democratic framework to actually use against the nation which actually upholds it. So sometimes democracy is not strength but becomes a weakness in so many ways. We will actually discover this. We will talk about this. Strategy targets weaknesses while reinforcing China's geopolitical agendas. Hybrid warfare tactics. China's hybrid warfare combines conventional military actions with disinformation campaigns, clandestine diplomacy, and economic influence. This, this synergy complicates the Western response by exploiting the vulnerabilities inherent in liberal democracies. I had talked about a few minutes ago. China's hybrid warfare combines conventional military actions with disinformation campaigns, clandestine diplomacy, and economic influence. This synergy complicates the Western response by exploiting the vulnerabilities inherent in liberal democracy. We have to remember very carefully that no system of governance, whether it is liberal democracy or autocracy or some other forms of of functioning of a state, like feudalism, communism, everything will have its inherent good things and bad things. There is, as of now, no perfect model of governance. Every model that we adopt and utilize will have its good part and also bad things which come with it. And people will be utilizing those weaknesses to actually weaken your society, weaken your country. Exploitation of liberal democratic values. The liberal democratic frameworks of Western nations create an environment that is easily manipulated. Beijing exploits values like freedom of speech, allowing disinformation to flourish and sow discord within adversaries' societies. Social change, changing the mindset and thought process of the people that China wants to influence. So it's a long, long thing that they plan over time with money, with jobs, with diplomacy, with warfare, with disinformation. It goes a long way. Disinformation's role in eroding democratic integrity. Disinformation campaigns aimed at undermining trust in mainstream media and government institutions have significant consequences for democratic integrity. The capacity to generate political polarization ultimately weakens public confidence in democratic processes and institutions. If people who are observing, if people are observing the current political scenario in, especially in India, you will see a lot of divisive agendas is being pushed by political parties to actually divide the people among different caste groups and other things, so that pit they can pitch one group against the other and gain votes. But in the long run, it actually does a lot of harm to the society itself. The political parties might do this because they want a quick uh, quick action so that they can win the next elections. But over a long term, this is not good for our nation. This is not good for our society as a whole, and also for democracy. So now we're going to talk about deep fakes and targeted campaigns, how AI and deep fakes are used, and we have seen a lot of examples of these. Understanding deep fakes. Deep fakes are AI generated media that convincingly mimic real people's actions and speech, often using deep learning techniques. Their ability to stimulate reality poses unique risks, especially when utilized in disinformation campaigns targeting social beliefs and trust in institutions. Uh, Targeting societal beliefs and trust in institutions. Techniques behind deep fake creation. Deep fake utilizes deep fake utilize generative adversarial networks, CANs, where one algorithm generates synthetic images while another assesses their authenticity. This iterative process leads to remarkably realistic outputs, making detection increasingly challenging for the average viewer and media regulators. So deepfake is a kind of a catalyst for disinformation campaigns, because this specific technology enables the the people who are creating this disinformation campaigns to actually enable them to actually be much more effective in their campaign, without a without deep fake being there, because this creates a barrier where even the seasoned media professional, government authorities who have the capability to actually detect disinformation campaign and work to thwart it, they become confused, and it takes time for them to actually analyze and make sure that they know which one is the correct and which one is not the fake. But unfortunately, because it takes time for them to actually ascertain and authenticate, and so the campaigners get a longer period of time to actually run their campaign, and that ultimately actually wins because more people they can reach in short time without being detected, and in that way they will be able to actually reach more people and change perception of many people in a very short time. And what they want change in perception. Case studies: political impact of deepfakes. Deepfakes have already demonstrated their potential to disrupt political processes, such as during the 2020 US elections. Fabricated videos could jeopardize candidates' reputation and influence voter opinions, showcasing how deepfakes can alter the political landscape dramatically in real time. Tailored messaging to Chinese diaspora. This is very important, which a lot of people would not be aware of, that how Chinese diaspora is utilized by the Chinese government, especially, and also its intelligence and security agencies to work for them via coercive means, via non-coercive means, and also via incentives and other ways. Give me 30 seconds, guys. Yes, now let me just. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay, do let me know if the audio is okay and fine, because there is some connectivity issue showing on StreamYard settings. So that's why I'm just not getting the camera on, because the audio might suffer for this. But let's see. Tailored messaging to Chinese diaspora. Chinese disinformation campaigns use targeted messaging, particularly with diaspora communities, to manipulate perceptions. By exploiting existing networks and cultural ties, Beijing can spread narratives that resonate personally with individuals, furthering its influence and control over public opinion. It's very important because the Chinese agencies know their perceptions, their cultural, their ties, who are Chinese who are living outside China. So they can actually much more effectively manipulate their opinion and perceptions compared to a common Western audience. Conclusion and call to action. Summary of risks and threats. Disinformation poses significant risks to national security, political stability, and public trust. The rise of hybrid warfare tactics, especially involving state-sponsored campaigns like China's creates an environment where misinformation can rapidly spread, undermining democratic process and leading to political polarization and turmoil. Recommendations for mitigation. To combat disinformation, governments and organizations must implement comprehensive media literacy programs, enhance fact checking initiatives, and leverage technology to track and counter misinformation. Collaboration between tech companies, media, and civil society is essential. This is very important part. Collaboration between tech companies, media, and civil society is missing here. As of now, we have governments and media companies do working in tandem. For good or bad, I do not know what's the outcome of that will become, because we have seen most often when organizations, businesses, and governments work together, the outcome is more negative than positive. It may change, it may yield some also good results, but overall, it's not good. The component of civil society, us as individuals, us as groups, as organizations, as civil society groups, as non-government organizations, needs to step up to create the third wheel, which will actually make sure that these disinformation campaigns do not become as effective as they are right now. Media and civil society is essential to create resilient information ecosystems that can withstand disinformation attacks. Importance of collective defense against disinformation. Collective defense against disinformation requires unified efforts among democracies to share intelligence, resources, and best practices. By fostering global partnership and joint initiatives, nations can better uh, identify, counter, and respond to state-sponsored disinformation efforts that threaten international stability. I'll give an example. Mm, Recently, we have seen the 5th August Bangladesh uprising. Now it is categorized as a coup orchestrated by non-government organizations, according to many reports. And we have seen that people, bloggers, and other social media influencers sitting outside Bangladesh were actually driving this misinformation, disinformation campaigns. They are not sitting in Bangladesh. They are sitting outside in democratic countries trying to subvert an democratically elected government. And they could do it because there is no cooperation, there is no exchange of intelligence between democratic countries. So, collaboration among democratic countries to create a framework, share intelligence, and work with each other to make sure that their democratic institutions, their democratic freedoms are not used for nefarious purposes against another democracy. Preparing for future challenges in information warfare. Adapting to future challenges poses posed by adapting to future challenges posed by disinformation necessitates ongoing research and development to countermeasures. Okay, research and development of countermeasures as technology advances, anticipating anticipating the emergence of tools like deepfakes will be crucial in developing defense mechanisms and maintaining the integrity of information in democratic societies. If you cannot trust an information which you receive on your cell phone, on your computer, or from a colleague who's saying this has happened, if you can't trust the information, that creates a fissures in our society and also undermines the democratic process itself. This ends our presentation. I will share. I will also share the primary article. Let me do that for you guys. This is created from an original article. So this is a short version of it. People who are interested in the original article, let me share the article on the chat. You can go and read it because it will become boring for you guys if I go through the whole article, because it has a lot of technical things which people might not be interested. Let me just share this to you. where I had get this. Yeah, here is the article. Hold on. So this is the article from which this presentation is created. Okay. If you want, you can read it. Okay. And if you want me to read it here as well, I can read it. But that it's a very big article with a lot of technical and other things. So do let me know. I can do both of them. Okay. Now we'll go back to our reading. So in our previous session, we finished off. Yeah. So we actually finished off our reading. Let me just go to PowerShell. So we actually ended our reading, and we are about to start a peaceful rise narrative. So we will going to read the peaceful rise narrative section, and the third section is about the confrontation between the East and the West in terms of how the intelligence agencies actually work on other countries. So let me start now reading the book. Okay, the texts are visible. Do let me know. Is the text visible? Okay, I need to, yeah, hold on. This is required. Okay, now let me know. You should be able to see the text. Okay, very good. Let me now go through it. Peaceful rise narrative. So before we read, let me give you a context. So in 1980s, I think in 1980s, China started to actually do business with outside the world. And that time, China was only interested in actually having a trade relationships with outside people. In that context, China was not doing any military things for next 30 to 40 years. But when China became a second largest economy, then we see a different kind of, so there was for 30 40 years a kind of narrative where China is a benign, China will become a kind of a toothless superpower, and US and the Europeans will be having soft and hard power both on the both continents, in Americas and also in Europe. So there was a kind of a narrative built by the Chinese government themselves, where they would actually devalue, they had actually devalued their currency for so many years to facilitate trade and export of their goods to them, and they would not interfere in any of the global affairs in general when the trade was going on. So there was a narrative created that China is not a threat politically and militarily in terms of global order of power. So it created a kind of peaceful rise narrative where China will be a great trading partner. China will be doing some cultural things. They would export their culture. China was actually building Confucius institutes. Confucius institutes are built like India. Like India has a India Habitat Center, okay, where the Indian embassy promotes Indian culture. Same way, China built Confucius institutes in various countries to promote Chinese culture, to promote Chinese trade, Chinese businesses. So over 30 to 40 years, a kind of narrative was built that China is not going to be military and a political threat to the global order. Now, let's read. Chinese leaders themselves have endeavored to attain this kind of narrative superiority. Considerable importance is placed on information control in the Chinese and Russian, not Soviet, scheme of things. Ever since the days of the Comintern, Communist International, a global organization that promoted communism from 1919 to 1943. Let me digress a little bit on this. Us as Indians, okay, who are Sanatanis, who are Hindus, do we have a, an organization like Comintern who would promote our culture by the government themselves? The Soviets were the governments. And so when people ask how this communist ideology became so prevalent and it became the primary narrative for many countries, how they became, because it requires an ecosystem to actually propagate and embed in societies overall. So, Comintern. And if we want our narrative, if we want our values to be shared with many people, we have to build an ecosystem to actually make sure that happens. Individuals can play a certain role, but creating institutions over a long period of time would mean an effective way of doing this, good for the society. Comintern, Communist International, a global organization that promoted communism from 1919 to 1943, which had degenerated into a tool in the hands of Stalin and was eventually wound up in 1943. This being a standard communist party habit, this being a standard communist party habit, the Chinese have invested resources to ensure a monopoly of power and for its image abroad to help it reach its goal. Now, again, we need to understand this statement. This being a standard communist party habit, communists in general would create a kind of ecosystem where they would embed and propagate themselves to vulnerable people via disinformation. Because why I say disinformation, they would say we are for the workers of the world, but they would actively work and make sure that the workers of the world do not get what they deserve. So they will cut deals with the business people and create monopolies. One monopoly which is there in India in a communist ruled state, people know what I'm talking about, where in a one communist ruled state, technically, not politically, still it's a communist ruled state, where in a certain city, you have only one provider of electricity. And who did this? Who created this monopoly? A communist government did this. So they will create, so that is how it's misinformation. Your intention is doing something else and you say something else. This being a standard communist party habit, the Chinese have invested resources to ensure a monopoly of power for its image for its image abroad to help it reach its goals, its long-term goals. China frames China frames its narrative in a way that encourages a feeling of complacency among potential rivals. Important, understand when we had talked about when we were doing the presentation that China gave a kind of a face, their face to the world where they are here to do trade. They are here to promote Chinese culture through Confucius institutes. They are not here to meddle in their political affairs, in their democratic rights, or being a military power. So a kind of a benign power without any teeth. China will become the very big powerhouse of a country, but it will not be a military threat to any other countries. That was a narrative being created. Complacency among potential rivals and opponents who might be an impediment to its rise. Therefore, the narrative it projects is that it is a country which believes in peaceful rise. We want to do trade, we want to do cultural exchange, but we don't want any war. We don't want any military confrontation. That is, that is, would not threaten anyone, not seek hegemony, and will continue to focus on its internal development, trade, economy. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2015, Xi Jinping had solemnly declared that China would never pursue hegemony expansion or create spheres of influence. It also endeavored to create the impression that it had an economic and political strategy that was guiding its rise. Deng Xiaoping himself led the narrative that China had no economic strategy. So you say you don't have an economic strategy, but you have one. Another part of China's narrative is that its Another part of China's narrative is that its rise was inevitable, that it would grow increasingly rich and powerful, and it would be fruitless to stop this from happening. What do you think? What this means? This is called psychological warfare, psyops, where you demoralize the enemy so much with your words and narrative that they would think we have already lost the war. So the enemy will not even pick their weapons to fight because make them feel defeated in their minds. This is called psyops. Stop this. It would be fruitless to stop this from happening. This is accompanied by an ever-expanding definition of China's core national interest, along with the conviction that nothing would stop the country from attaining supremacy and that the US was in permanent decline. How you manipulate the thought process, the perception of the common people that China's rise is inevitable and the decline of US global power is permanent decline. It will go to decline. And when you push this narrative, this perception via disinformation, via social media to the democracies where these people live, you are creating a kind of docile people who have given up that we are going to be failures, we are going to be a declining power. Let's accept it. This is how psyops work. It assertions it assertions in the South China Sea and periodic display of military might and state-of-the-art equipment on various National Day parades are messages meant to convey both to its neighbors and the US about its intentions to assert military power in the Western Pacific. China is banking on the possibility China is banking on the possibility that the US will accept its preemptive assertions like the rest of the world, but with much higher ambition. China has been watching the US conduct in areas of prime American interest in recent years. China actually does real studies on every US war. US has gone into a war. And like if you listen to and read a lot of other things, you will know that there was quite a bit of buzz regarding the Ukraine war and how US handled Ukraine war, because the Taiwan problem, the Taiwan conundrum that China has, and the way the Ukraine war is shaping up, it has a lot of parallels between what's happening in the Ukraine at that time and how China wants to actually utilize and learn to have Taiwan in its own sphere of influence, which it doesn't have right now. Prime interest in recent years. It has observed how, under President Barack Obama, the US was unable to assert its position on Crimea and Ukraine against Putin's Russia, or its its red lines in Syria, Afghanistan, red lines in Syria, leaving ground for Russia once again to move in. Now, under President Trump, the US has come to an arrangement with the Taliban in Afghanistan, a Pakistan backed force it had initially vowed to destroy. Its efforts in the future would be to disrupt the international order that the US has endeavored to maintain all these years. A weakened American defense of global rules, norms, and freedom of navigation. This is very important, freedom of navigation. The economic prosperity that we see today, currently, which is driven by partly by globalization as well. And globalization was actually enabled by a thing called freedom of navigation, which was ensured after Second World War primarily by the US naval forces. So this freedom of navigation, this is something which came about after Second World War, and US was the primary guarantor of the seas, where US would deploy its naval assets across oceans to make sure that the ships going from continent to continent with millions and billions of dollars of goods would not face any challenges, security, with pirates, specifically piracy, the sea piracy. Freedom of navigation would also confirm to its Asian allies that the US has become an unreliable protector, protecting the seas, the shipping lanes which carry the goods from one country to another is a very important part of this. This would make them more amenable to China's behavior and supremacy in the region. According to a 2017 Defense Department report to the Congress, the aim of the Chinese leadership throughout has been to perpetuate party rule, maintain domestic stability, sustain economic growth, and development, defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity, secure China's status as a great power, and ultimately reacquire its regional preeminence to safeguard its interest abroad. These are not unusual goals and would be similar to, say, Russia's objectives. The other similarity between Russia and China is that they have traditionally dependent on the intelligence agencies and bureaucracies to deliver. Both concentrate on their own populations as well. The Americans seem to think that there would be no war between Chinese allies and American allies. The Chinese would use the principle of information war by combining network resources of the state and its allies against those they seek to undermine, especially in the latter's economic and political institutions. War is a very expensive and causes long-term damage to the society and economy of the country specifically. War should be the last option for any country, and they know it. Economic and politic. Okay. Latter economic, combining network resources of the state and its allies against those they seek to undermine, especially in the latter's economic and political institutions, which they do quite successfully. Besides, China has allies in Russia, Syria, Iran, not to mention Pakistan, who could help who could help them out. US military strategists fear that this may be a war they, the US, do not know how to win. Okay. Poindexter quotes. Okay. Poindexter quotes an article that appeared in the People's Daily. People's Daily is the Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece, or Chinese government owned newspaper, which said which said that an adversary wishing to destroy the US only had to mess up the computer. Okay, okay. Let me just. This is very interesting. Which said that an adversary wishing to destroy the US, adversary, enemy of US, who wants to destroy the US, only had to mess up the computer systems of its banks using high-tech means. Subversion. This would disrupt and destroy US economy. And this is something they are writing in a National Daily of China, which is produced and published by the Communist Party of India, the default government in China. Destroy the US economy. If we overlook this point, and so China does not want to fight physical military wars. They will fight if required, but the better option is using subversion, using agencies, using technology, using deepfakes, using disinformation to actually win a war rather than going and fight and with guns and bullets and tanks and planes. Wishing to destroy US only had to mess up the computer systems of its banks using high-tech means. This would disrupt and destroy the US economy. If we overlook this point and simply rely on the building of a costly standing army, it is just as good as building contemporary Marriott line roads. The Chinese also rely on their intelligence agencies for psychological warfare to affect perceptions and intentions. In one of their many encounters with the US, the Chinese had lowered the value of yuan. I had mentioned this in the presentation. Chinese had lowered the value of the yuan after warning the Americans against putting more restrictions on trade. So China wants trade. China wants to do trade because it favors them significantly, massively. And they can use the money, the surplus money from the trade to actually put their put their other intentions and put their money where their intention and initiative is. And they said we will devalue our currency, which is a bad thing to do. In general, if you're going to devalue your currency, it's a bad thing to do economically. On special circumstances, it's a good thing to do, but overall it's not a good thing to do. So Chinese would actually lower their value of their yuan, their currency, and say, okay, we are very weak, okay, we bow down to American power. But it doesn't work that way. They would gain billions and billions of dollars of trade surplus which China would have, and they would use that money to do whatever they want, whatever their strategy is. So it looks very benign, looks very defeatist at the first onset, but that is not the intention. Intention is to gain billions of dollars of trade via US. Warning Americans against putting more restrictions on trade, thus driving home the point that they had the ability to disrupt American economy. Messages in the form of news leaks or ground activity before a significant visit to or from China is a favorite tactic of nations to throw the other side of balance and create a new narrative. A few days before the US Secretary of State Robert Gates was scheduled to visit Beijing in January 2011, the Chinese revealed photographs of their new twin engine J-20 stealth aircraft. Prominent American newspapers like the Wall Street Journal carried a photograph of the stealth fighter, which was inducted as a rival to America's top of the line F-22 Raptor, a of the successor to the F-117 Nighthawk that had been that had been shot down over Serbia in 1999 during the Kosovo War. The Chinese agents the Chinese agents scoured the region, buying parts of the aircraft from local farmers and shipping them back. See how the Chinese government actually invests money and puts laser focus on what exactly they want, and they will do any extent to achieve those strategic goals. The problem with democratic countries, not a problem, but a kind of a systemic issue, is that with democratic dispensations, this becomes a problem. You have the state, you have the judiciary, you have the press, and you have the political parties. You have the political parties who would change their opinion based on the votes that they get. So a democracy will not be able to actually do what they need to do because there are too many factors, too many variables which may inhibit that thing to go on. So, in that way, over a long term period, political stability is very important, where you have, and it may not be very good, but overall, on a strategic level, political stability and too many changes in the political stances and also social change is not good. Chinese agents scoured the region, buying parts of the aircraft from local farmers and shipping them back. They were not mere souvenir they were not mere collectors, but had been tasked to pick up the parts in order to reverse engineer the aircraft. It probably took the Chinese nearly a decade to do this, but they did succeed in creating a perception of their ability to match the Americans. The other message to the rest of the world was that China was now getting ready to be America's only rival in the region. That was the narrative. As China pushed as China pushed itself as China pushed itself up China puts itself up militarily and economically. The intelligence needs of the government also grew, and the service itself become more sophisticated. China's main target is the US, while other countries are mostly stepping stones to reach this target. China has been pouring China has been pouring billions of dollars into its efforts at information warfare and propaganda, which is estimated to be much higher than what the US spends on public diplomacy. The Chinese do not want to fund any project that might embarrass them. So, when a Beijing organization offered Stanford University US 4 million to host a Confucian Institute of Chinese language. This is the institute which actually does cultural diplomacy, and in the garb of cultural diplomacy, they will also do some other things. But their Confucian institutes are there to promote Chinese culture and also teach people how to speak Mandarin, the Chinese dominant language. So you will see these Confucian institutes in almost every capital city where you can go and learn Chinese. And we do not have that kind of thing from India. We do have it, but not as funded, well executed strategy as Chinese have. It was on the condition that they would not allow any discussion on Tibet. There is no hesitation. There is no hesitation in Beijing in throwing out American journalists seen by authorities to be reporting on issues they find embarrassing, like corruption, environment, human rights. China only seeks positive imagery, building the image. So there's a thing called face, face in China. So and also we also in India we have this kind of thing where something bad happens to a family member, nobody will talk about it out in public, so that the family's good reputation is not tarnished by act of an individual. And that sometimes becomes that the problems that you have inherited will keep fostering, and eventually it will destroy the family itself. But people fear of fear of losing their image, their face over the community becomes a kind of a barrier. China has the same kind of thing. China would never allow any bad news, any news which impacts negatively its image overseas, would not allow it to happen, would not allow to be aired. The Chinese leadership presumes, the Chinese leadership presumably felt it needed to spruce up its image as it was getting ready to face increased challenges from the US. In December 2016, the state-owned CCTV News was refurbished as China Global Television Network. India doesn't have one. India has DD International, but uh, it cannot be compared to what China has done. A multi-language, multi-platform media group with 6 TV channels, 3 overseas branches, a video content provider, and a digital media division. The world needs to know better. The world needs to know better about China. Urge she to the new management of CGTN, China Global Television Network. A giant media outlet, Voice of China, was created in 2018, which combined three state television and radio broadcasters aimed at audiences outside China to sell the Chinese dream like American dream. As it continued as it continued to have problems with its international image. The Voice of China concept, with a multi-billion-dollar budget, would have the usual drawbacks with centralized party control, and this meant a continued lack of credibility for the Chinese narrative. Beginning in 2018, the Chinese Foreign Ministry had begun to host about 100 journalists from leading media houses in Asia and Africa who were invited for a 10-month stay. Okay, listen to very carefully. Beijing in 2018, the Chinese Foreign Ministry had begun to host about 100 journalists from leading media houses in Asia and Africa who were invited for a 10-month stay in China, given the red carpet treatment, which included apartments in some of Beijing's exclusive areas in the Jiangmen diplomatic compound, a monthly stipend worth rupees 50,000, and free tours twice a month to various Chinese provinces. They were given language classes and, at the end of the program, awarded degrees in international relations from a Chinese university. In addition, they had access to Chinese government officials and ministries. See how the ecosystem works, how they create propaganda mouthpieces by giving individuals beyond what they expect in life. Now, those journalists would go back to their original countries and would say all the good things about China. And the people who are listening, reading those reports in their newspapers, in their social media feeds, would never know that that individual went to China, stayed, took money from Chinese government, and then they will say this. So they will look as general journalists who would write some stories about China, but the behind story is very different. Many other countries like the US, UK, and European nations have for years have been giving media fellowships. So we have a few in our country as well. I'll not take names, but you know whom we are talking about. Kaun Jaat Ho, giving media fellowships, but the difference is the extent of control that the Chinese exercise on the entire program. The journalists could not go unaccompanied on individual reporting assignments, and therefore reporting on places like Xinjiang and Tibet was out of the bounds. The Indo-Asian News Service, the Indo-Asian IA, okay, so this is Indo-Asian News Service, IANS, Jansatta. Jansatta is an Indian news service, and the Indian Express were okay. This is interesting. Hmm. The Indo-Asian News Service (IANS), Jansatta, and the Indian Express were among the media organizations that participated in the program. And in 2016, none of them had bureau in China. The other Indian news organizations who were present in China were the press in China were the Press Trust of India (PTI), the Hindu, India Today, Hindustan Times, Hindustan Times, okay, Hindustan Times, the Times of India, the Indian Express participated in two of the three programs since the launch of the fellowship. It did not see it did not see any conflict of interest and was satisfied with the reportage that that came out of it. Some of the journalists from various organizations who filed dispatches from China omitted to mention that they were on government hosted fellowships. Chinese purpose had been served, for favorable reports from non-Chinese sources were now being published, which would add to the credibility of its narrative. The CGTN experiment, which they did, they poured billions into it, and it did not work as effective as they wanted, but they improved upon that. The intention did not change. The means to do this changed. So I tell everybody, do not trust anybody in the media because you never know who he is. Do not trust myself, do not trust me. Do always double check, triple check things. Ask people and never make up your mind until you know you have done enough checks to actually even believe one news story. You can see I have shared one community post in our post posted regarding a movie, and you can see which newspaper it is and how they do things. Now we come to the last chapter: American globalization and Chinese modernization. As China rises, it is a question of global conjecture. As China rises, it is a question of global conjecture about when it will overtake the United States. China still has considerable ground to cover in this regard. Even if it becomes the world's largest economy, the US would remain the most technologically advanced and innovative society. Silicon Valley is the Silicon Valley is the brand name. There is no other country as of now that spends more on research and development or has such a large number of high quality places of learning, especially its universities. The English and the universities you have seen in recent times, especially Columbia University, how it has degenerated into something which was the whole world saw when the Gaza protests were happening. So you can see within a generation or two, you can actually destroy an institution, its reputation, and its faculty, its credibility if you invest enough money into doing this thing. Okay, now we'll go. Silicon Valley is the brand name. There is no other country that now spends more on research and development or has such a large number of high quality places of learning, especially its universities. The English language became the world's lingua franca in the second half of the 20th century because of China, because of America's global reach, and not because of British Empire. No country can match Hollywood's influence as also and also that of American TV programs that the world watches. So United States is a unique, not unique, but in modern times, Soviet Union and US were both superpowers in their own right. But the US as a superpower had the narrative control, okay, the soft power. It was a soft superpower with its Hollywood and its media, and it had the unmatched military and technology which actually enforces. So in that way, US has become a kind of a monolith of superpower because the combination of soft power and hard power creates a kind of monopoly which actually very difficult to do away with. Even the US will go into a decline, but the effect of its hard and soft power will continue to perpetuate even for decades and even centuries. And the same thing also we see when we see about Chola Empire in South India. The Chola Empire was gone, but the Chola Empire minted coins were still in circulation. Even the Chola Empire was gone. So the ecosystem you built, the process you built, doesn't wither away if you are not there anymore. They will continue to perpetuate over time. No country can match Hollywood's influence and also that of American TV programs that the world watches. Everything from sitcoms to news. China has no brand equivalent like Google, Microsoft, Coca Cola, Walmart, or Disney that are household names around the world. There is no equivalence of Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and scores of others in the military and weapons market. No other country has been willing to use no other country has been willing to use military force in the furtherance of its own interests like the US. No other country has actually, that's very factually correct, that even Soviet Union was a superpower. It did not invade countries every decade. But we have seen US intervene militarily in multiple continents, in multiple countries in a very frequent manner. And that is actually a precedent in so many regards. No other country has been willing to use military force in the furtherance of its own interests like the US has. These adventures may not be successful all the time, but the fact remains that America is usually ready, even eager, to intervene militarily. That's primarily because of the American military complex. The entire economic system has been fashioned by the Americans for their own interests primarily. The military industrial complex that we talk about. And it is not going to be easy to shake it without causing a rupture in global economy. China has nothing comparable to the American values of individualism, freedom, and democracy, which are far more readily acceptable than the value of Chinese Communist Party, laws of soft power. When the Al Qaeda wanted to draw attention to its activities, it attacked New York, and the world has not been allowed to forget that. Had it attacked any other country, the story would have died within a fortnight. Very important. The other aspect that may not be talked about too frequently or loudly is the American supremacy is also linked to the dominance of the white race. By implication, it relegates other races to lower rungs in the hierarchy. China still has a long way to go, rise, even, even if its rise is inevitable. For a long time, China has operated on the narrative that it was the middle kingdom. It was the middle kingdom to whom the barbarians to its north and south would pay homage and bow down. I think kowtow to it, bow down to it. So China has this middle kingdom hypothesis. Okay, it considers itself the a center of the world. So middle kingdom means Chinese people, Chinese civilization thinks it is the center of the world. So we will do an episode on middle kingdom someday to understand uh, how Chinese behave, how the Chinese state behaves, how the Chinese Communist Party behaves. It's not about communism, but it's an assertion of communist idea and also assertion of its ancient ideas who Chinese are. So the Middle Kingdom part plays a very important role in that. We'll discuss that in someday. It has begun to accept that it is China that would have to do the readjustment in the modern world and not the other way around. So China being the center of the world, it would need to do something to make sure that things happening as it wants to happen. A situation where leaders of neighboring states would come of the bearing gifts of the celestial kingdom may be over. But so, like in ancient times, if you are a superpower, if you are a big, big kingdom, smaller kingdoms would come to you with some gifts. Okay, okay, to be in good terms with the bigger power, and that's how normally people would behave. It would behave. Celestial kingdoms may be over, but the country would be happy and feel secure if the neighbors would accept a China centric Asia. We'll also do an episode on this as well, China centric Asia. China's leaders are convinced that they belong to a China's leadership. Now, this is very important. China's leaders are, let me try to, uh, China's leaders are convinced that they belong to a single superior Han race. This could be one of the ingredients of this could be one of the ingredients of heightened competition between US and China. US think they are whites and whites are superior to other racial groups, as white people know everything. White people are here to civilize the world. Okay. And on the other hand, Chinese people think they are the Han race is a superior race which should rule over other people. So now there is a conflict. So the psyche, the society, the history, it's all playing out a role in this competition between the US and China. A people who consider themselves representatives of one of the oldest civilization of the world. Chinese civilization is one of the oldest civilizations of the world will, because of historical, cultural, and racial reasons, demand their rightful place in the major reordering of global relations. As China grows, its narrative about its okay, as China grows, its narrative about its preordained position. Chinese think preordained position. Chinese think they are a superior race. Han race is a superior race. So they are preordained. They are given right, God given right to rule this world or change the world order. It is given, there is no question about it. Preordained position in the global equation will also grow. Martin Jacques, Martin Jacques, in his book When China Rules the World, this is a very important book for people who want to know China. Read this book. Martin Jacques, in his book When China Rules the World, the end of the Western world and the birth of a new global order, wrote, if the calling card of the US, if the calling card of the West has often been aggression and conquest, China will be China will be its overweening sense of China. China's will be its overweening sense of superiority and the hierarchical mentality that has endangered. The pro-China narrative has been helped by the existing reservoir of Western, chiefly American, goodwill towards China and the notion of manifest destiny. The West has long had a fascination for China. Pearl S. Buck in 1931 book, The Good Earth, The Good Earth, substantially influenced Western sympathy for Chinese communism in 1930s. Academia, people who can write, people who can write good books, people who can write influential books, people who can speak, the narrative war is won by them. Sympathy for Chinese communism in 1930s. American journalist, American journalist, Edgar Snow's book Red Star over China, published in 1937, gave wide publicity to Mao's Long March and the Communist Party of China. Curiosity about the country increased after it became a closed society in 1949. Its sudden opening up after Deng's reform, Deng Xiaoping, Ping, Deng's reform created a new ecosystem in the West, made up of think tanks, analysts, books, academic academic studies, and expert commentaries on China. We see the same kind of thing done by the Japanese. You will never hear bad things about Japan in general, in newspapers, in books, in documentaries, also in like normally you have a positive a positive view of Japan. Is this by design or is this inevitable? The answer lies in both of them. The Japanese people culture is very good, but by virtue of being good doesn't mean people know it is there. You are good. You have to build a mechanism over a long period of time, create systems, create ecosystems which would perpetuate this message to people whom you want them to listen and hear. So this is by design. If you know that Japan is a good civilized country, a clean country where people follow rules, the perception that you have in your mind, this is by design. This is not natural the way things work. There are a lot of bad things about Japan, which we don't, which we'll never know about it because it is not publicized, not spoken about, not written about. Published in 1937, gave a wide publicity to Mao's Long March and the Communist Party of China. Curiosity about country increased after it became a closed society in 1949. Its sudden opening up after Deng's reforms created a new ecosystem in the West, made up of think tanks, analysts, books, academic studies, and expert commentaries on China. A about the nation narrative about the nation was being built by the Americans and other Western experts. This is very important. If you want to create a credible narrative, you need people who are not necessarily Chinese themselves. I think if you want to build a narrative, a propaganda, you will need to hire other side to speak for you rather than the other way around. It was clear that China needed American approval to be able to get on the the inside track in the global race for domination. It was the American concept of globalization and China's modernization that made dealing with the latter an attractive proposition on the former's economy. Trade and economic relations between the two grew rapidly despite acute and unresolved differences on strategic and political issues. The Americans assumed that they would remain in control once they had parceled out manufacturing to China and Mexico and service, services, outsource services and back office jobs to India. Very important. This line is something that people need to understand. The Americans assumed that they would remain in control once they had parceled out manufacturing to China and Mexico and outsourced services, back office jobs to India. Something which looks economically feasible, that I am getting a product at 5 rupees rather than 15 rupees. It's a very rational thing to do. I'll buy a product with 5 rupees. But it's a good decision for this moment. Over a long period, it may become disaster and it may end your economy as well sometimes. A few years after Tiananmen Square incident and fall of the Soviet Union, Deng Xiaoping's instructions to the Chinese were that they should hide they should hide our capacity and bide our time. A lot of people who know China, they will understand what it exactly means. Never show your capability to your enemy. Then your enemy will know your strength, your capacity, and they will also build their own capacity. So fool the enemy by showing yourself as weak, as feeble, as inferior to them. Then the enemy would think, okay, the China is not a threat to me. What it can do? It is very weak in so many ways. So your enemy becomes complacent about your capability and capacities. And this is what exactly happened with United States. Hide our capacities and bide our time, but also get some things done. The Chinese spoke about this quite often, but never published this cryptic instruction, probably because and China never published this thing. It was never published as a document. Hide our capacities, bide our time, but also get something done. The Chinese spoke about this quite often, but never published this cryptic instruction, probably because the narrative at that time was to give the impression to the world that China was weaker than it actually was, or because because saying it too loudly might be misconstructed by others as an act of deception. For the Chinese, Deng's instructions implied that until their country was strong enough, its foreign policy should fly under the radar and not attract suspicion as an assertive policy would do. At a conference in China, at a conference in at a conference in China of American, Asian, and Chinese think tanks in 1994, the Chinese went to great lengths to insist that their country would never be a threat to anyone. By 2002, however, the pretense had been dropped, and Chinese scholars were clear that it was turning from a regional to global power. The Chinese government adopted the American narrative used by President Bill Clinton, who referred to the country as a responsible power. In his extreme desire to coddle it and to its leaders, the term responsible power was first used. How the narrative is built. Understand this simple word, China as a responsible power. And when Bill Clinton said China is a responsible power, millions of people, millions of Americans, millions of people who speak English across the globe would have heard this. This would have been reported in magazines, talked about in talk shows, and by the end of the day, people who are politically conscious, politically aware would discuss among themselves. And somebody would say, Bill Clinton has said China is a responsible power. See the power of narrative warfare. That one statement by Bill Clinton had traveled across the globe via media, via talk shows, via newspapers, via magazines. And end of the day, a person who has nothing to do, who has not even seen that statement, read about the statement, will get affected by this because somebody who's friends with will tell him, hey, Bill Clinton has said China is a responsible power. Now, an idea is planted on that individual's head who has not seen anything, who has not read newspapers, nor read books, nor watched programs, nor has watched talk shows. An idea is planted in his head that China is a responsible power. I can go and buy Chinese goods. China is good for the whole world. Understand how it actually works, how it functions. Chinese, okay, who refer to the country as a responsible power in his extreme desire to coddle to its leaders. The term responsible power was first used by a Chinese scholar, Wang Huzhua, which was then adopted by Clinton. Wang had written in 1999 maintaining a proactive and constructive posture. China will enter the 21st century with the image of a responsible big power. With the passing of time, the so-called China threat theory will be defeated automatically. Okay, it's almost 1.5 hours. Let me check. Okay, do you want me ask me to continue or because it's already 1.5 hours. So if you want, I can continue, or else we can start the session in the next because it's very interesting. So let me see again. Okay, let's do it for a half an hour. But I don't want. Let's see how long it is. Okay, it's okay. I think we can do this. Let me get a glass of water and then I'll come back and we'll finish this. The face off between East and the West. Till then, you can ask some questions if you want, because it's a long, complex thing. हाँ, yes, yes, yes. ये नहीं, we will finish this part. वो छोटा सा ही है, तो उसको खत्म कर लेते हैं. China's, okay, face off between East and the West. China's image as a responsible power in the 21st century has received a huge setback with the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic in late 2019, early 2020. This has produced this has produced multiple and completely different narratives about its origins, nature, and scope, with furious accusations and counter accusations being traded by the American and the Chinese. Some discourses, even those originating in the US, as early as January 2020, alluded to the creation of this virus in America. This undoubtedly suited the Chinese, embattled, embattled as they were with the accusations of having caused the virus and then having covered it up. Its secrecy and evasiveness about COVID-19 has been a typical Chinese reaction. Its desire not to be shown up as having lost face, face, lost face. It's a Chinese proverb, and you can read more about it. The concept of face in China led to a clumsy, cruel, and ineffective cover-up. David David Bonavia, a former bureau chief, David Bonavia, former bureau chief of London Times in Beijing and author of several books, explained in his 1989 book, The Chinese, what face, what face meant, what face meant to the Chinese. The Chinese, what face meant to the Chinese. To their mind, face is beyond common meaning of conceit. Face is beyond common meaning of conceit or vanity. It is a desire to never be shown up or seen as stupid or wrong-headed. For instance, the Chinese do not have anything. For instance, the Chinese do not have anything similar to the Christian practice of admitting a mistake to the other. It is not considered a virtue here. In any bitterly antagonistic relationship, both parties attempt to make the other lose face. In a mildly antagonistic in a mildly antagonistic relationship or a business deal, each side expects the other to take his or her face into account. The loser can exit with the loser can exit with their self-respect intact. In what in what might in what one might call it face-saving arrangement. So in Chinese society, you would not how would I say make the other person look villain, look bad, okay, look ugly. You can part your ways, but you do not abuse the other person or accuse the other person of doing some bad things about it. So face saving arrangement. Face saving arrangements. Revenge revenge is in the order if no such arrangements are made. So revenge is the last option, not the first option. The Western narrative has the concept of a good loser. The Western narrative has a concept of a good loser, but the Chinese believe in a good winner. For instance, if a Chinese football team defeats a foreign visiting side, it will be effusive in its praise for the loser to the point of embarrassment. Okay. So, so if a football team comes to China and they and the Western country loses the football game. The Chinese people would say, "How great football you have played! You know, you have played so many games. This man is good. This man is good," and they have lost the game. The other side has won the game, but the praise and everything will be done on the people who have lost the game. At the time of the at the time of the outbreak of COVID-19 in Wuhan, there was nobody to help the Chinese save face, both at home and abroad. The narrative then needed a way out. Consequently, theories that the novel coronavirus originated in the US seems to have been sponsored by China and were featured on some American websites. It will be a while before the truth will be known about the way the virus was let loose on the world, or maybe it will remain mystery forever. The chronology, the the chronology is significant, though by November 2019, it was believed that the Wuhan virus had escaped the Chinese mainland. China and the US signed a trade truce agreement, which included a clause about mutual consultations should there be a natural disaster or unforeseen circumstances. Weeks later, on 23rd January 2020, the Chinese admitted to the coronavirus and shut down Wuhan. As the pandemic grew more sinister, the World Health Organization appears to have succumbed to Beijing's pressured and allowed even participated in the uh, of, uh, obfuscation of the obfuscation of its true magnitude. This enabled China to remain okay, okay, truculent truculent, and it had the audacity to pretend everything was normal by organizing feast for an estimated 80,000 people in the epicenter of Wuhan. China's size, population, and growing military and economic power will inevitably that mean that somewhere in the distant future there will be an end to Western universalism. Chinese activism in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East has largely gone unimpeded. President Xi Jinping's dream is to dominate Eurasia from the Western Pacific to the Atlantic, with the entire landmass and the Indian Ocean included. The implications that uh, the implication then is that China is the new superpower, and its narrative has all the ingredients of a brewing conflict. China-US rivalry was inevitable, and its consequences are now becoming apparent. About 20 years ago, Aaron L. Friedberg, now a professor at Princeton University, wrote an essay, "The Struggle, the Struggle for Mastery in Asia." He began by saying, "Over the course of the next several decades, there is a good chance that the United States will find itself engaged in an open and intense geopolitical rivalry with the People's Republic of China. Such an outcome is not inevitable. Few things in international politics are, but there are strong reasons to believe, that it is at the very least plausible and even quite likely. Indeed, there are reasons to believe it is already underway. In his book published in 2011, Friedberg, Friedberg said, The suggestion, the suggestion that the United States and China were destined to compete vigorously with one another is not necessarily to clash no longer seems far-fetched. Add add the notion that we are already, in certain respects, engaged in an intensifying strategic rivalry is, if not universally shared, certainly more widespread today than it was a decades ago. There was an There was an inevitability in this clash between East and the West, and the true narrative are revealed itself after Western domination peaked in 1990 and the decline of European empires set in. The end of the Second World War was a decisive turning point in the decline of the West. Besides China, okay, this is interesting. The end of the Second World War was a decisive turning point in the decline of the West. Okay, why is saying that? Besides China, besides China does not see itself as a China. Okay, besides China does not see itself as just a rising power, but its leaders think they are returning they are returning the nation to its position of regional preeminence that is that it once held, and what they feel as natural and appropriate. Again, the concept of middle kingdom power. China is the center of the world in terms of civilization, in terms of economy, in terms of culture. Chinese culture, the Han people, the Mandarin language is the best in the world, and everybody should accept that Chinese people, the Han people, the Chinese culture is the best. The Chinese strongly believe that their civilization has no equal in this world. Very important thing that we have to understand how the Chinese behave, how Chinese do things. It comes from their historical, cultural understanding of who they are as Chinese identity linked to Chinese culture, Chinese philosophy. The Chinese strongly believe that their civilization has no equal in the world, and their rightful position lies at the epicenter of East Asia. It was in the second decade of the present century that China became more aggressive about selling its narrative in the US. In 2019, China Daily, a mouthpiece of Chinese government, purchased more than 500 print pages in several American newspapers. It ran hundreds of propaganda articles, including on issues that were considered controversial, like the protest, like the protest in Hong Kong, Tibet, and Xinjiang, as positive stories. As positive stories, three mainline newspapers ran paid supplements from China Daily under under the rubric China Watch that were designed to look like real news stories. In December 2018, Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C., organized a discussion on whether China was taking over Hollywood. There was a growing trend towards China financing some of America's favorite films. Okay, on films in China. So China has a system where it allows selective foreign films to be shown to the Chinese audience, and we have seen correct some Indian films which were shown in China. Now, why a studio, why a filmmaker or a producer or an actor want their films to be shown in China? There are two reasons. First, the economy. The Chinese economy is very big because China is a insulated society. They do not see a lot of information coming out from the outside world because China is a closed society in general. So you can't access Google, Facebook, or any other media things in China. You can't access it without a VPN. So this insulated population, when it sees a Hollywood movie or an Indian movie or some other movie, it has a novelty factor, which means that millions of people, even if it's the worst movie that the country has produced or is not a good quality movie at all, millions of people will go and watch that movie just out of curiosity, and that means millions and billions of dollars in revenue that the movie producer, the Hollywood studio, will get just by being given access to the Chinese market. So in that context, and that billion of dollars is actually almost guaranteed income that they will get if they get access to this. So in that regard, it is important. China financing some of America's favorite films, buying theater chains, and as the country emerged as the largest film going population, China, because of the culture and other things, people would go and watch a movie because there's not a lot of things you can do. There are not a lot of distractions. Country emerged as the largest film going population. The American film industry was falling. The American film industry was falling in line with Chinese censorship laws because the Hollywood studios want their films to be shown in China, because China has a one of the biggest film going market, because it has a good economy. People have money to go and watch movies, and because there are only selective films available which can be watched by the audience. If you get in by any means possible, revenue is guaranteed in so many ways. The lure, the lure of money was irresistible. The lure of money was irresistible, was irresistible. With the Chinese market in mind, Hollywood Hollywood began producing more films to suit Chinese audiences and pander to its censorship laws. With so much money tied up, with so much money tied up for the now and the future, China is calling the shots. It can push a kind it can push a kind and benign image benign image of China no different from any other developed country. Chinese giant Alibaba invested in the Hollywood film Mission Impossible Rogue Nation in 2015. The China Film Group invested the China Film Group invested in the record-breaking film Fast and Furious 7. Chinese entertainment and technology firm Li TV opened its office in Los Angeles in 2015, and in the same year, another Chinese company, Hui Brothers, signed an agreement with an American company, STX Entertainment, to produce a dozen or more pictures. In January 2016, Dalian Wanda Group is one of the biggest industrial groups in China, acquired Legendary Pictures, becoming the first Chinese company to acquire a studio in America. The trend seems the trend seems to be that Hollywood movies will increasingly be made by China or by Chinese companies investing in Hollywood. As Chinese media investment in the US, along with investment in network digital platforms increases, there will be less American influence on Chinese narratives. It will be the other way around. On occasions, the Chinese can also determine the career graph of prominent actors. Richard Gere, for instance, was at one time Hollywood's biggest draw, but he was dumped by Tinseltown the moment the Chinese objected to Richard Gere's closeness to Dalai Lama. American audiences may never get to see any films on Tibet, the Uyghurs, or the Tiananmen Square massacre until these have passed China's censors. Hong Kong and Shenzhen-based Phoenix Television is now a significant presence in Canada and the US with its with its cable, satellite, and IPTV connections. It is a partly state-owned network that offers programs in Mandarin and Cantonese at home, but caters to the diaspora and acts as a counter to American influence on the Chinese in America. Its founder and CEO, uh, Liu Chang Liu Changle, was close to the Chinese Communist Party and was an officer of the PLA. Liu worked as a radio journalist during the Cultural Revolution. All this has given China a high profile in the media and the ability to counter some influences. In contrast, there is no Indian presence on television networks in the US, and even in print media, it remains restricted. China had chosen China had chosen the Asia Pacific region as its first battleground against United States that it perceived to be on the decline. In an interview with Charles Rose, Ameri- in an interview with Charles Rose, the American TV talk show host in 2009, the former Singapore Prime Minister Lu Kuan Yew observed, the 21st century will be contested for supremacy in the Pacific because that is where the growth will be. And now it has become Asia Pacific because Pacific is sparsely populated. But if you're going to add Indian Ocean, Asia and Pacific region, it contains the large amount of natural resources, sea lanes, energy resources, and also population to consume them. Supremacy in the Pacific because that is where the growth will be. That's where the bulk of economic strength of the globe will come from. If you do not hold your ground in the Pacific, you cannot be a world leader. The Americans perhaps heard this but remained complacent or hesitant. The Chinese heard this too and went about acquiring greater strength in the Pacific before moving on to other spheres. Lee Kuan Yew was right, more so because of what COVID-19 has brought to the world. If the Chinese replace if the Chinese replace the US as a preponderant preponderant power in any of the most vital regions, the Indian Ocean for India and the Pacific for the rest of the world, there will be grave dangers for both Indian and global interests. Sun Tzu may have said that the supreme art of war was to subdue the enemy without fighting, but surely he did not have COVID 19 in mind. It now seems that somewhere along this quest for power, China could be losing its larger narrative. So we will end our reading today. We will start with pandemics and greater power politics in our next session. Let's see anything, questions, anything somebody has asked. Okay, if you want to ask anything, you can ask. I will be there for another 10-15 minutes. And do read this article. Uh, I have shared the article. Let me share it again to everybody. Like it's little bit of like people should read about this because this is very important. There are some technical things, but keep aside. Try to read the article because whatever information I have got in terms of the presentation and also the book, it comes from the article itself. So just scroll up and you'll see the article at the top of the page. Okay, so there are no questions. Okay, Hollywood is pretty much owned by, okay, not entirely, but yes, Chinese do have a large interest and a presence there, but not entirely. And with Trump coming in, it is going to wane. So that is something not okay. Chinese media making Hollywood movies. Yes, Chinese media making Hollywood movie. Uh, this is happening. ये हो रहा है. And it will happen because global trade is like this. Okay. This is an interesting question. Does any movie made by China in India? Not directly. But if you see a lot of not as a media company तो उससे काम नहीं करती है. But if you see the Chinese influence, so if you remember correct, Paytm and some other fintech companies, okay, they are actually owned by Chinese investment companies. Okay. And there, okay, directly you may not see any Chinese company directly investing in Indian movies. But what may be happening, which we will not know, that there would be third party companies who are funded by Chinese, but they are based out of some of in Dubai or some other region where the financing comes, and those companies would be investing in Indian movies. But indirectly, China, I think, indirectly China is investing in Indian movies to create a kind of narrative. If you just see this latest controversy regarding the Malayalam movie on Kodra riots, okay, and the movie producer is some reporter, BBC reporter, former BBC reporter Menon. How does a BBC reporter, how does a BBC reporter has money to finance a Malayalam movie? Who is paying her money? Who is giving her financing to do that? So indirectly, that may be happening. Hmm. That's an interesting comment. Hmm. Okay, fine. So we will continue our reading in the next session. This is a very interesting thing that we are going through. So we are learning a lot. Yeah, Empuram. Yes, Empuram. I'm talking about Empuram itself. Empuram. So, like, whatever the news I saw that this movie is produced by some lady Menon, and she was a ex BBC reporter. So how does a reporter has so much money so that she can produce a Malayalam movie with a superstar of that same industry? Let's see. Let's see. I am not sure. Uh, we may maybe a little bit later as well. Let's see. Yeah, Mohanlal. So he's a superstar. And how can you hire a superstar of Malayalam cinema and you are a reporter? Okay, so thank you everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your questions and comments. Do share your feedback. Okay. Yes, Mulan is not an Indian movie. Yeah, yeah. It's a Hollywood. It's a Chinese Hollywood production. Mulan was a joint venture between Chinese company and Hollywood. So it's technically not Indian. So thank you everybody for joining. See you in our next reading session. Till then, Jai Shri Ram, Bande Mataram.